Our featured guest tonight has been responsible for writing some of the most beloved movies of the 80s and 90s, from Steven Spielberg's Hook to Coppola's Dracula to Muppet Treasure Island and the incredible sci-fi classic Contact. He's left his mark on each decade with his phenomenal screenwriting. He's also worked with some of the greatest directors of modern times. Here to chat about his incredible career is none other than James V. Hart. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I didn't realize I'd done all that. It's nice to hear. It makes me feel good.
So, I mean, you've had an absolutely incredible career in the movie business, but I'm kind of curious as to how that journey initially started. Did it manifest itself in some early interest in films and
Oh
stories
yeah.
and creating
Oh
things?
yeah. No, my dad was a big movie buff, and I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and um, he would pop popcorn and put my brother and I in the back of the car and take us to the drive-in with mom. Uh, and that started our habit of going to the movies. And then we had a theater called the Gateway. It was like a neighborhood theater. And mom would drop you off on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock for 25 cents. You spent the whole day in the movies. You got a double feature, a bunch of cartoons, probably 4 or 5 serials. And then we'd walk home and we would act out the movie. The neighborhood kids, we'd all get together and act out the movie. Um, and I remember when we saw Spartacus, we went home and chopped all of my mother's flowers to bits and doing the sword fights, you know.
Yeah.
And I grew up loving the movies, and I never knew you could do them, you know. So finally, my dad got an 8 millimeter camera, and we started making little films, you know. I get the neighborhood kids and put the cowboy hats on or whatever. We'd use firecrackers for gunshots. And the Gateway became kind of a cultural, even through high school. I grew up going to the Gateway. So even in high school, when you got to high school, it was Friday nights, and you were, instead of watching a movie, you were trying to put your arm around a girl or something, you know. But you still went to the movies. And I got an education in watching films of the Gateway. And then my dad would let me stay up late and watch what they called the $1 million movie, 11 o'clock. And that's where I saw the old Errol Flynn films and fell in love with the great films of the 30s and the 40s. So didn't have film school. I did go to film school. I went to SMU, which was unheard of for a film school. Um, and I think there were 30 of us in the class in the whole department. But the head of the department had such great connections. I got to meet George Roy Hill with a print of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that no college group had ever seen. He brought it all the way from Hollywood to show us. Alan Pakula brought his first films to us. I got to see Dustin, uh,
Dustin Hoffman.
Dennis
Dennis
Hopper,
Hopper.
and uh, he came with Easy Rider.
Yep.
And uh, and at that time nobody knew who he was, but he brought Easy Rider along with Jack to show in our little tiny theater. And I got to watch co-eds put their phone numbers on Jack's arm because we didn't have texting in those days. But we got to see Easy Rider, you know, in advance. So I thought everybody got to do that, and it was an amazing time in the 60s and 70s because the business was exploding. L.M. Kit Carson, who, if people don't know, one of the great journalists and great filmmakers and great writers, Texas writer, Wes Anderson started. He showed a documentary film he made that made a lot of noise in those days, David Holt Diary. And I asked a couple of questions after the screening, and he said, "You and I are going to go have coffee." So he singled me out and took me to have coffee and said, "This is what you're going to do. You're going to write. You're going to be in this business." And that really was kind of the start. We made films in Texas, and my partner and I drove to California in his Ford van, and we had a 16 millimeter movie. We sent it to Coppola. We sent it to Dennis Hopper. And I remember sitting in Coppola's office in those days, Zoetrope, which was the Mecca in San Francisco. And my partner and I waited every day for a week in the outer office to meet Coppola. And his receptionist said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Coppola's busy. And I'm sorry, he's tied up today." And said, "Well, he must have seen our movie. We sent him our movie. We want to talk to him." And finally on Friday, I remember she said, "Well, he's leaving town for 2 weeks and he really won't be able to see you." This is 1970, right before The Godfather. But Zoetrope is making,
Yeah.
noise. And all of a sudden I see his big bushy head coming down the hallway, and I elbow my partner and say, "He's there." And he opens the door and we're going, "Mr. Coppola, Mr. Coppola, we're the guys from Texas. Did you see our movie, Mr. Coppola?" And I'm sure the dragon lady behind us was going,
Yeah.
yeah. And he didn't say a word. He pivoted on his heels, headed back down the hallway, waved over his shoulder and said, "Keep making movies." And my partner and I looked at her and went, "Wow, Francis Ford Coppola just told us to keep making movies." We had no idea we were being blown off. We took it all very positively.
Threw you the
So
old bone.
oh yeah. So years later, I mean, he actually got my friend a job on a Corman film. So years later, when I was able to sit with him on Dracula and recounting that story, he said, "Well, I don't remember any of that, and I had people like you in my office all the time." But that was kind of our beginning. There were no walls. Oh, I take it back. There was a wall. I had found out that a friend of my, a cousin of my aunt, my aunt ran the animation division at Warner Brothers, and he arranged a meeting with one of the top executives there on this screenplay that my partner and I had written. And we went to meet. Went into the gate at Warner Brothers, and we're on the lot going, "Wow, we're here." And we go into the executive office and we sit and wait, and we're in our beads and long hair and bell bottoms and sandals and probably bad mustache or something. And we go and sit in the office, and it's got all these awards and shit on stuff. And I'm not going to say the executive's name. And he comes into the office, does not sit down, but stands behind his desk and said, "I read your script," and I had the story department read your script. And we're going, "Oh yeah, okay, great," And he points out the window and he says, "You see those walls out there?" And we go, "Yeah." And he said, they're there to keep people like you out."
Jeez.
And it was a very short meeting. "Thank you very
And
much."
was this Warner Brothers?
As Warner Brothers, yeah.
Warner Brothers. Okay.
Same trip with it. But that was our introduction to the Francis Ford Coppola said, "Keep making movies." And the executive at Warner Brothers said, "Those walls are to keep you out." So that was my triumphant trip to Hollywood. And when I was just striking, and we were marching outside Warner Brothers, just this last strike, and I'm with my son, who's also Writers Guild, and so is my daughter. And I'm walking by that office window in that wall, and it had a huge flashback on this is where I began. Now I'm striking, now I'm picketing. Again, those walls were trying to keep us out. So long-winded answer. Sorry, you got me going right off the bat. So
so during this whole course of things, I mean, did you have full parental support, or were they concerned about the old starving artist thing?
it's a good question. I think my mom was in the arts. She was played a musical instrument, and she taught school, and she was, and all through high school, we'd done plays, theater, and really needed to be in business. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. They had the lottery, so suddenly I had 4 years of my life that was handed back to me, and they were actually very supportive. We raised money in Texas for my first film. That's how I met my wife. We shot it all over Europe. It won a lot of festival awards. My dad ended up investing, and I think that they recognized that where this passion and desire. When my brother was a world champion flautist, I mean, we're from Fort Worth, Texas, and he's going to conservatory in New England, and I'm going to LA to make movies, and it was they supported our desires. They supported that I wasn't going to go in the family business, neither was my brother. So we were really fortunate. We had a lot of support from them all the way through our careers.